Hey everyone, this is The Last Unionist with your host Toby Green. And in this episode number 3, we are going to be looking at the aftermath here of the Big Bang of Labor Part 3. The trial is coming up. Will it be fair? Man, I gotta tell you, it is a good feeling when I can hit that post and come out. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not a professional broadcaster, so I absolutely love when I can actually do this once in a while in a professional, somewhat professional type of way. So let's just kind of recap where we left off, from the last episode. At this point, August Spies has been detained. Him and his cohorts have been rounded up, and essentially they raided their newspaper shop. The police did, and the reason that the police raided that newspaper shop and how the importance of this was that the Haymarket Square set off an absolute over-the-top level of state repression and anger, and this was incredibly intense. Because most people there were quite a few people. It's not like everybody felt the same way about everything. There were quite a few people who were not on either side of the situation, were kind of indifferent. But once they heard that a police officer had been blown up by I guess they would call it now an improvised explosive device, that had a terrible, terrible blow of turning everything against the working people. The tide had been turned, and not in the good way. The tide was now on repression. The whole 8-hour day issue was in the back seat to anarchists killing police officers. And this was a very, very scary, absolutely fearful time within labor. This was as close to the death knell of the American labor movement as you could get, in the sense that people didn't know what to do or how to do it. They were scared. And many of the Knights of Labor, again, Knights of Labor had gone from 70,000 people to 700,000 people. They had already rejected communism and anarchism. They had struggles, and we'll talk about Knights of Labor later on. They had already had struggles and issues that were taking place within their labor movement. And now you're facing the fact that they're being lumped in with this anarchist bomb explosion. So it created a dynamic that was incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So in the aftermath, legal requirements such as search warrants were cast aside. Chicago police squad subjected the labor activists of Chicago to an 8-week shakedown. So essentially from May until June, it was intense. The Chicago police squads were really going wild. They were going to their meeting halls, places of businesses, breaking it up. The emphasis began to coalesce around the speakers at the Haymarket rally and the newspaper, which was the Arbiter-Zeitung. A small group of anarchists were discovered to have been engaged in making bombs on the same day as the incident, including round ones like the one used at Haymarket at the bombing. So there is, on some level, there is a reasonable, not everything can be laughably BS. There is a reasonable suspicion that these anarchists were August Spies and others were involved in the bombing. One cannot just simply go, well, there's a reasonable thing, but they didn't do it. The bomb making stuff was similar in terms of the fragment, in terms of the chemical stuff. It was similar. So, again, there's definitely a probable evidence piece here, but again, no search warrants, and there's a lot of pieces that may have been waived, may not even be applicable at the time. I'm not entirely sure on the laws of the 19th century, but what I found fascinating was that Rudolf Schnaubelt was the police's lead suspect as a bomb thrower. He was arrested, and by May 14th, it had become apparent that he had played a significant role in the event. He fled the country. William Siegler, who had turned state's evidence and testified for the prosecution, was not charged, which of course is a common tactic that police will use, as they will try to divide the guilty. So by June 4th of 1886, 7 other suspects were indicted on grand jury and stood trial for being accessories to the murder of one of the police officers, a police officer named Deegan. And so at this point, this is an interesting trial. That was Matthias Deegan, who was killed by the bomb blast. So the trial then was Illinois versus August Spies. Now this gets going pretty quickly. This gets going only 2 weeks later on June 21st. And it would go on till August 11th. So this is pretty fast justice. The trial was conducted in an atmosphere of extreme prejudice by both public and media towards the defendants. As we said before, people were hot, they were upset, they just wanted to see these people killed. They didn't care about the truth. And here's another part. It was presided over by a judge named Joseph Gary. Judge Gary had open hostility to the defendants. He consistently ruled for the prosecution, and he failed to maintain any decorum. So basically, if this was done today, in theory, you would have a shot of basically beating the rap just on this judge's inability to even give a fair trial, and that was really a hard thing here. The defense. So as things were going on, the selection of the jury was really difficult, because part of the thing that you try to do when you're selecting a jury is you're trying to find people who, in theory, do not have a vested interest one way or another in the case. And over hundreds of people were called. Almost 1,000 people got called for the attempt. All union members and anyone who expressed any sympathy towards socialism was immediately dismissed. So in the end, a jury of 12 was seated, most of whom confessed prejudice towards the defendant. So at this point, again, I've said before, at this point coming into this trial, now let's look what August Spies and the other folks are dealing with. They've got a judge who hates them. They have got a community incessant and upset, excited, incensed at the issue. At the bombing. So you've got this issue of people being really upset, really angry. Now you're coming to court with a judge against you, a jury against you, the bailiff is against you. So the question of a fair trial was so not even down, not even in the cards for these folks. Now, and you understand it, right? Like, you understand that this probably wasn't an everyday occurrence of a police officer getting a bomb blown up at him. This was probably a pretty new area, and in addition, it's sort of like a law and order piece. The prosecution, the frustrations are high. The prosecution was led by a man named Julius Grinnell, who argued that since the defendants had not actively discouraged the person who had thrown the bomb, they were therefore equally responsible as the conspirators. Okay, so let's talk about that. So the saying here is, and it's very loose, the saying here is that, hey, you know what, you might not, they're even admitting, hey, you might not have actually thrown the bomb, you might not have, but because you didn't speak to talk them down, you are equally as guilty. I mean, that is some really baffling and interesting situation. The jury heard testimony of 118 people, including 54 members of the Chicago Police Department, and the defendants, and Albert Parsons, who we'll probably talk about at some point. His brother claimed there was evidence linking the Pinkertons to the bomb. This reflected a wide belief among the strikers. So, naturally, in a situation like this, the Pinkertons are completely hated. They are completely and utterly hated for their role in this whole situation, their role in basically setting the situation up. They're completely hated, and you understand why. And the strikers are like, we don't even trust any of this stuff. But again, keep in mind, the strikers are in no position. They have lost the community support. So when you lose the community support on this level, right or wrong, sadly goes out the window. And America has a deep history of this in many, many trials. So what I want to read here, or just get an excerpt to give you kind of a flavor, is a person named Art Young, who was this is something I found at Marxist.org, who is basically given us an eyewitness account uh, uh, of the Haymarket Square issue and the aftermath of it. And so I'm just going to read. I might skip around. There may be some pauses because I'm trying to give you kind of a good picture. This is his account. I need not dwell at length about what happened at Haymarket Square on the night of May 4th, 1886. 3 days after the nationwide strikes for the 8-hour day. The story has been told many times. The mass meeting, some 1,500 persons, and the protest of the wanton killing of the workers by police. Mayor Carter Harrison was in attendance. Albert Parsons was speaking, then leaving with his wife for a beer garden a couple blocks away. Samuel Fielding was mounting the wagon used as a rostrum. Rain began to fall and the crowd dwindling. The mayor departing, and visiting the nearby Des Plaines Street Police Station to report to Captain John Bonfield, disregarding the mayor's words, and in a few minutes leading 125 reserve policemen to the scene, in order the remaining audience of some 200 persons to disperse. Then from above the wagon a whizzing spark, a tremendous explosion, many policemen falling, their comrades firing into the panic-stricken crowd, killing and wounding. 7 police lay dead, and how many civilians were killed by police bullets that night was never definitively known. Nothing was ever done about it. But then the hysteria set in. The hue and cry, widespread police raids, arrests of hundreds of men and women suspected to be anarchists, socialists, or communists. Announcements of the discovery of various dynamite plots. Announcement of the finding of bombs and infernal machines. An indictment of Albert Parsons and 9 others as conspirators responsible for the Haymarket explosion and the deaths. The newspaper editors and public men generally cried for a quick trial of the defendants and prompt execution of the guilty, and here was every reason to believe from the published reports that the accused deserved to be hanged. Public opinion was formed almost solely by the daily press, and in its columns evidence was steadily piled up against these labor agitators. Parsons had disappeared. On the night of the bombing, police all over the country were watching for him. Was not his flight confession of guilt? Rudolf Schnaubelt also was gone. He had been arrested twice and questioned briefly, but had been released. And Captain Shack was incensed at the stupidity of the detectives who had let him go. Like the great mass of Chicagoans, I was swayed by these detailed reports of the black hardness of the defendants. Outstanding business and professional men and prominent members of clergy denounced the accused, who are all lumped together as, quote, anarchists, and condemned to the 7 Haymarket killings as the most wanton outrage in American history. In the bloody and gruesome descriptions of the tragedy of May 4th, the city's people forgot the needless killing of 6 workers by the police on May 3rd. I too saw evidence against Parsons in his running away. He had spoken at the mass meeting, and the explosion had come only a few minutes after he left, and then he had vanished. Innocent men do not run away when a crime has been committed, so my youthful mind naively reasoned. They stay and face the music. But when the opening day of the trial on June 21st, Albert Parsons walked into court and announced that he wanted to be tried with his comrades, my sympathy swung a little in the other direction. He had been in seclusion in Waukesha, Wisconsin, working as a carpenter and living in the home of Daniel Hone, the president and for many years past mayor of Milwaukee. If Parsons were guilty, I reasoned now he would not have come back. He needn't have come. The police had been unable to find any trace of him. Judge Gary snarls. Shortly after the jury had been selected, I was assigned to make some picture of the scenes for the courtroom. The place was crowded, but I managed to get a seat with reporters at a table near the defense attorneys. The prosecution was putting in its case, and there were continual objections by the defense to the line of questioning and the frequent side remarks to the jury by Julius Grinnell, the state's attorney. Usually these objections were overruled in a rasping voice by Judge Joseph E. Gary. It occurred to me that I'd hate to be tried before such an old, snarling, vicious judge. It was common knowledge that it had been difficult to find reputable and competent criminal attorneys in Chicago willing to defend the accused cause, which was too unpopular. The editorial notice had been plainly served that only a pariah and an